My name is Adriane Kuzminski, and I'm here to talk about blind accessibility. So for a little overview of this talk, I know we do have an hour and a half. I think an hour and a half is kind of a bit long for anybody's attention span, so I'm going to try and keep it to an hour. But it is in 3 parts. So I'm going to go over the history of blind accessibility in tech, blind accessible design principles, and the third part is about the accessibility community and developing personas. So, blind accessibility in tech. All right, I know this is a game audio group meeting. Screen readers are typically not within our field. However, I think they're very important for understanding when designing for visually impaired users. So for a little bit about the history, speech synthesis projects that were aimed at blind users started in the 70s. You had 1976, the Kurzweil reading machine, which was, it used optical character recognition to scan the words on the page to read it out loud. And then in the 1980s, you had the talking typewriter by IBM Research. And these 2 companies are very important to notice because Kurzweil and IBM, they've not only pushed tech forward for people with disabilities, they've also been crucial in hiring people with disabilities. So IBM actually hired their first blind employee in 1914. Yes. So moving along with the history of our computers, we of course had the command line interfaces in the 80s. I think a lot of us remember using those. And what was great was they were accessible to blind users because of screen readers, because it was all text. It could be spoken out with, say, for instance, IBM's screen reader that was developed in 1986. However, we didn't want just text on our computers. We wanted icons and graphics and the pretty stuff. And so this created a whole new set of challenges for blind users. So the icons were not able to be labeled, so they were incompatible with screen readers. And also the original Mac had an inaccessible keyboard which had no arrow keys. So you can see here at the top, it's the original keyboard that was created in January 1984. In September 1984, they did create the numeric keypad that does have the keys, the arrow keys at the very top. But you also had to purchase that for another $100, and that's 1984 $100. But 2 years later, in 1986, they did include the arrow keys with the Macintosh Plus keyboard. So along with this, as we got into the 90s, then we had screen readers that were compatible with GUI computers, such as IBM Screen Reader 2, again IBM, and Alpha Access Group's Outspoken for Mac and Windows. So today we have several options for screen readers, which is excellent. Almost every device can have a screen reader on it. So we have desktops, we have VoiceOver for Mac, we have JAWS, NVDA, Narrator, several others for Windows. For mobile, we have VoiceOver for iOS, and we have TalkBack and Voice Assistant for Android. And on consoles, on the Xbox One, we actually have Narrator for the home screen and the Xbox API for in-game text. And I'll be going over more of that later on, because these are actually much more recent developments. And for games themselves, this has been kind of a point of contention within the accessibility community because there's not a lot of straightforward answers. One thing I did learn about when I was at GDC last month was there's Poly for Amazon Web Services and Lumberyard. I've actually been gone a couple weeks. Right after GDC, I left for a couple weeks, so I've literally had no time to delve more into it since then. But for me, I'm very excited that it is compatible with Lumberyard. You also have Monogame, which creates games that are screen reader compatible. One that came out is called A Hero's Call, which is a completely blind accessible game. And you also have games made for Python, and then also proprietary engine games that are screen reader accessible. But when it comes to the game engines themselves, besides monogames, Python games, proprietary engines, Unity and Unreal, they neither have screen reader compatibility for creating games, for developing games. They also don't have solutions for implementing screen reader accessibility within the game. Nothing that I've seen yet. I spoke to Unity, and they started working with a company that could go down that realm for reasons that I'll go into in a couple slides. The Communications and Video Accessibility Act, that's starting to push things along. So I'm hoping that this slide is going to be outdated very soon. But we also have for our DAWs, for Pro Tools, it is actually screen reader accessible on Mac with a program called Flow Tools, which was created at Berklee College of Music. And we also, for Reaper, we have SWS and OSARA extensions that allow it to be screen reader accessible. So therefore, somebody with visual impairments can design sound using these two programs. And people do. Some other improvements in blind accessible media. We have the prevalence of virtual assistants. So Alexa, Cortana, Siri, Google Home, they're taking over tech. And right now, 21% of the U.S. population owns a smart speaker. That's as of January of this year. And like I said, almost everything has it. Computers, smartphones, consoles, smart TVs, watches, they all have built-in virtual assistants. And it's estimated that over 7 billion devices will have virtual assistants by next year. What's great is that the virtual assistants have improved in their affability, just how friendly they sound, and also their flexibility in interpreting commands, which makes them more likely to be used by sighted people. This could allow for more default accessibility for users with visual impairments. However, I do have to note that personal or virtual assistants doesn't always create accessible tech. Say, for instance, I have Google Assistant on my phone. I can control my phone with Google Assistant. I can ask it what the weather it is. It will tell me. However, if I ask Google Assistant for a web page, it's not going to read that web page out loud. So it doesn't act as a screen reader. So we just have to be aware of that.
Oh, wow. I use the screen reader functionality that's built within my Android phone to tap into like the browser window, and I can get those things to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no, it's okay.
I'm just wondering like why that would not be implemented within what you were just describing.
With Google Assistant
with Google Assistant, like it's just so obvious because they already have the tools available. Like my Chromebook can do that.
Yeah.
So like, why wouldn't they have it integrated with Assistant?
It's probably a different. It's probably a different language that it's using. For example, with Xbox, they have the screen reader for the home screen, but they have a whole separate API for in-game. So it may be that it has certain functionality, but it's not able to work as in depth. But I'm basically just making comparisons.
That sounds reasonable. Thank you.
Yeah. Some other recent improvements we've had is with audio description, which has become so much more prevalent. Like you all just don't even understand. It is in theaters. We have there's the final rule in 2016, so just a couple years ago, that requires a certain amount of audio description in audio description equipment in U.S. theaters. And on television, the number of audio described hours went from 50 hours up to 87.5 hours per quarter. And that was just in 2017 that they raised it. And the big one is streaming. So for a little bit of history, Netflix in 2015, they created Daredevil, the TV series. And at that time, they created it and it did not have audio description. And there was a huge backlash. And so a lot of blind fans were like, hey, this is about a blind character and I can't even watch this? Like, come on. Like, just add audio description to it. So they listened, and they not only added audio description to Daredevil, but all of their original content. And that was only within a couple years that they were able to cover so much of their content. And so they add an average of 22 newly audio described titles per month. So they have a total of 931 titles as of today, when I checked the amount again. And iTunes has over 1,000 audio described titles as of, like I said, today. And all Pixar films are audio described on the Disney Movies Anywhere app as of 2016. So like I said, this is all very recent, 2016, 15, 17. What's interesting is looking at the outlier with Hulu. They currently have a plan to add audio description, but they have nothing currently. And in 2017, there was actually a class action lawsuit filed against them by a couple different blind organizations. So now they're feeling that that lack of preparation for this, and now they're the outlier. So as I mentioned before, there's the Communications and Video Accessibility Act. I am not an expert on, this is a massive law. My resource for this is a guy named Ian Hamilton. He's an accessibility expert. He's based in Bristol in the UK. And he is the guy for going into all the nitty-gritty of this. But it is part of the FCC. So it's not under ADA or Section 508 or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, of course. However, it is similar to the ADA in that it is more left up to interpretation, which is a good thing and a bad thing because it allows for more creative solutions. So like with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it's very detailed about what you're supposed to do. Same thing when it comes to television. However, if you are going to look at the subtitles for a television show and you look at subtitles in most games now, we're actually doing way ahead of broadcast subtitles, just in terms of quality. So it allows for it allows for more progress. And even though we don't actually fall under the ADA, I kind of wonder if games will eventually be considered public places when it comes to a lot of the massive games that we have now. But anyway, so the CVAA requires text-to-speech for devices with advanced communication services to include electronic messaging services, which would include in-game chat, which are on consoles. And this law, the waiver expired just a couple months ago. And there was a little bit of drama with it. There was certain games that said they didn't include certain features because of the law, and so it's one of those things that it's great for the industry. Certain people, I think, interpret it as an infringement on maybe their libertarian values or something. But overall, it's really going to push games forward, and especially when it comes to blind accessibility and text-to-speech. So Xbox is the clear frontrunner when it comes to text-to-speech. They have support not only narrator on the home screen, which works very well. They also have support for in-game chat in Halo Wars 2, Forza Motorsport 7, Forza Horizon 4, and Sea of Thieves. And they also have voice menus in Crackdown 3 and The Division 2. These are all very recent developments, especially Crackdown and Division. Crackdown 3 also uses the Xbox One's option that I didn't know about until I, of course, found out about it. It's called the Let Games Read to Me option that's in the accessibility options. And it actually allows for certain UI elements to be described. And so it's very limited right now, but it's more than any other game that I know of currently. And other games have developed their own solutions, such as Apex Legends. They actually have a platform-agnostic text-to-speech solution. So here is going with the timeline of tech. Here's a quick timeline of blind accessibility in games specifically. So the Game Accessibility Special Interest Group was established in 2003. AudioGames.net, which is a very popular game for gamers with visual impairments, that was created in 2005. A game called Papa Sangre came out in 2010, which used binaural audio to be played without a screen. Swamp was released, which is an audio-only multiplayer first-person shooter in 2011, and people are still playing that game. Injustice: Gods Among Us was patched with an accessibility mode for blind gamers in 2003. It only took one sound. It was the sound of being able to interact with the environment that put blind competitive players back in the field with sighted players. So it was very important that they listened and they found a solution. It just took one little sound. Skullgirls was also patched with text-to-speech compatibility in 2014. They used a solution that basically grabbed the text with clip trap and then spoke it out with clip reader, I think is how it worked. And they eventually added support in 2016 with Tolk, which is an open source screen reader abstraction library for Windows. Then in 2015, we had A Blind Legend, which received almost $50,000 in in crowdfunding, and they also received public assistance from the French government. And that same year, Frequency Missing, which is a Swedish point-and-click adventure that was created by the University of Skövde, that has actually been translated since, released last year, I think. So it's now in English. But it's the only point-and-click adventure that I know of anyway that is completely blind accessible. And it's the same experience whether you're blind or sighted. There's no accessibility mode or accessibility options. It's the same game whether you're blind or sighted. And then in 2017, Zach Quarles from Microsoft, he wrote about designing sound for blind players in Killer Instinct. And up until that point, there wasn't a whole lot of input or output from the AAA industry when it came to blind gamers. So it was very, very, very important in that it was his article, which it's on my website for the resources. I'm trying to think if I linked it here on this website or this presentation, but it's very inspirational, but it's also extremely informational too about design decisions. And in 2018, we had Madden NFL 18, which became blind accessible through haptic feedback. And this was kind of an interesting story because Karen Stevens from EA, she actually became EA's first accessibility. She had accessibility lead. So she's one of the few people. There are now, I think, 8 or 9 people who have accessibility roles at companies. And it's starting to become more and more as the months go along. But she was one of the very first people to have an accessibility title, especially at a AAA game. And what's interesting also is that she is partially deaf, so she wanted to make it accessible for blind players, but she doesn't do sound design. And so she took the route of haptic feedback, and it works for fans of Madden. So, and then now, 2019, we have the CVAA and everything that's brought. So when we talk about people who can benefit from accessibility, of course, there are people who have low vision or who are blind. And I did a little color coding here to make more sense. I apologize, the font is a little small on some of these slides because I was cramming too much information on them. But you have 36 million people worldwide who are blind, meaning from this chart that they cannot make out, they are 20 over 200, meaning they cannot make out the E on the chart. And then you have 217 million people who are moderately to severely visually impaired, meaning they are 2070 to 2100. And 188.5 million people who are mildly visually impaired, meaning their vision is 2030 to 2050. You also have aging gamers, and who could be at risk of losing their sight. So I really wanted to find some worldwide statistics, but this was the best I could find. But for the US, 1 in 4 gamers are over the age of 50. And in Australia, 43% of people over 64 years old play games. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers have risen since these statistics. But also, even when it comes to people who see just fine, or they can see everything, you also have people who have issues with text. So people who are dyslexic, some people use screen readers to help them comprehend the text. And 1 in 10 people have dyslexia. And then you also have new language learners. So again, I couldn't find a good statistic. There was one that I saw that said 1.5 billion people are learning a new language. And I could not find any source or any study to back that up. So for this one, I had to go with Duolingo. That app alone, and there are several different types of language apps, that one alone has 300 million active users. So there's definitely more than 300 million people, but there's one statistic to back it up. All right. You also have the benefits outside of gameplay. So games are fun, but these experiences also translate outside of the gameplay experience. So for your quality of life, accessible games can promote technological independence and job skills. So if you're able to use a computer or a tablet, those skills can translate into research, education, design, retail, customer service, et cetera, et cetera. Accessible games also encourage people to learn to program using blind accessible game engines like Monogame or with Python, and accessible IDEs like Visual Studio. They also create shared experiences and help blind-sighted people to be able to relate to each other, because I do find that there is a big gap there. You still have people who say that it's like that little game, would you rather be blind or deaf kind of thing. Like we still just kind of play around with it like it's something that we still kind of treat it like a game, like it doesn't really exist type of thing. So it's getting that ability to relate. And at CSUN, I was pretty excited because Microsoft did show some text-to-speech functionality with Minecraft. And at least for my wish list, when I go to different accessibility, they call them, what are they called? Accessibility expos. The one that parents would always ask for is Minecraft. They're like, can we play Minecraft? Can we play Minecraft? Kids love Minecraft. So, and then also accessible games expose players to cultural expression and art. I want everybody to be able to play The Last of Us. And they also encourage gamers with disabilities to be able to express themselves, not just through game dev, but also when you think of streaming on Twitch and YouTube. That is a form of expression for a lot of people. And then you also have the tech advancements. So game accessibility can improve design when it comes to, say, interactive car audio, virtual assistants, which I've mentioned before, hands-free, eyes-free devices, voice user interfaces, e-readers, and even when you think of VR audio, it could reduce the strain of having to read subtitles. It could also, of course, subtitles are commonly paired with a voice, but say if it was a menu screen, instead of having to read the menu in VR, being able to take off that visual strain and be able to hear the menu instead. And this can also help. I don't have any research to back this up, but I see ties to when it comes to motion sickness, being able to take off some of that visual load and experience VR through audio instead. And of course, you end up reaching a wider audience, both disabled and abled. And the main thing for me is that there are blind accessible solutions for just about every other type of media. So for books, we have audiobooks and screen readers for people to enjoy books. For film and television, we have audio description. For the internet, we have screen readers and we have the accessibility guidelines. So why should we ignore games? Why should we say that games are too hard? All these other ones we can do, but games are just too hard. I just don't buy that. But we do have a lot of challenges. And like I said, very small font, cramming too much. So culturally, like I said, when it comes to sighted people, we're very sensitive to audio that we are not expecting. So when it comes to screen readers, you can just look on YouTube and look up how to turn off narrator on Xbox or how to turn off voiceover on iPhone. And you will see comment after comment of people losing their minds because they didn't know how to turn off their text-to-speech on their phone or on Xbox. And even when you think of maybe pop-ups, like we can deal with pop-ups on web pages, but if that pop-up has audio with it, like we lose our minds. So, of course, like I said, I don't have any research to back all of that up. But I think that with virtual assistants, we're going to see more flexibility. So if you could tell your Xbox, turn off narrator, that's going to be a much more pleasant experience. And sighted people are going to warm up more to screen readers / voice assistants. So this is an interesting study that I found. Sighted people in general have a stronger stronger memory capabilities for visual and tactile stimuli compared to auditory stimuli. So right here, you can see the auditory is red, tactile is green, and visual is blue. And we have same day recognition, next day, and next week recognition. And you can see that the auditory recognition is lower on all counts by quite a bit, actually. So quite the jump down. So we're just more visually driven as sighted people. And we also have a lot of myths about the blind community. Like I said, there's that inability to relate and treat it like it's the worst thing that could ever happen to go blind, having that kind of fear and paranoid perspective on it. You also have the American Federation for the Blind. They release articles about how to work with employees with visual impairments just to prepare people. And like I said, even with those YouTube comments about turning off voiceover, look at YouTube comments by YouTubers with visual impairments, and you'll see there's one person, her name is Lucy. You see comments on there saying like she can't read the comments, like she can't use a computer, and it's like, just how far off are we?
I just wanted to point out, I have a friend who's getting her sculpture degree at Yale University.
Nice.
Recently blind, and
yeah.
knows Braille, has a Braille computer. The Braille computer has no screen. The keys have motorized dots, and she can read. And so the input and output stream are the same. I mean, for the interface. So it's a combination of there's the haptic aspect of that, but also just she had me try it, and I could understand it as she translated it because I get to see the recognized patterns and so forth.
Yeah.
It was just, I was wondering if for that blind computer system, I don't know if there's more than one or if it's just one machine that is circulating among the blind community for that means of, she can read her email through it and everything.
Yeah.
So it does have network capability.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, are there games that are designed for that platform?
For Braille?
Yeah.
That I know of, okay, at least when it comes to games, popular games, or like mainstream games, I don't know any that output to Braille devices.
Yeah.
When it comes to educational games, I do believe there are some interactive stories for Braille output. And the one thing that I always like about those machines is you have the keys, but there's also I'm not sure how many years old it is. It's pretty recent, but you can just tap on a flat surface. So it's like just an iPad, but it actually recognizes where your fingers are. And so you tap with your fingers as the Braille cells. So you can tap 3 or with 6 cell Braille or 8 cell Braille. And I'm like, that is the future of typing. Because you don't need anything. I don't need a keyboard. You can just tap right on a flat screen. So, and that's the thing is like looking at what people with disabilities already have and utilizing strengths. So when it comes to, I'm going to go over this in a bit, but like screen reader comprehension and mental mapping and Braille, it is, yeah. Like I can't even play when it comes to a Hero's Call. Like, I try to get through it, but it takes so much mental mapping that is just automatic for most players. And for me, it's like, this is a skill. This is a skill I just don't even have.
It's really remarkable just the amount of recall that my friend Emily has for her spatial surroundings, getting to and from her classes and to and from her studio on her own. She has a total internal map of everything, and she's better navigating than I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I've skewed deviation, but I can still make out shapes and everything. She can't see anything.
Yeah.
No signs of anything.
Yeah, it's when I was at CSUN, which was the week before GDC, there was I was talking to the guys at the Sony booth, and they said there was a woman who came up and asked if it was a different company. And the reason she went to the Sony booth was because that's where that company's booth was last year.
Ah, wow.
Like she still had that map memorized.
Fantastic.
From, so it's like these are skills that we as sighted people can't honestly relate to. but we can still utilize. And like I said, I'll get into this more, but that's why testing with gamers with disabilities and with blindness, low vision is so important, because we can't frame it on, I don't understand it, therefore it doesn't exist. It's really looking at these strengths. And so even with the industry, they're all visually oriented fields. All these design principles that go into building games, game design, UI design, UX design, they're all extremely visually oriented when it comes to learning them. There's not very much mention of sound design. And of course, we also have sound design is often left to the later stages of development, which makes it harder to advocate for more sound, of course. And game audio often focuses on the aesthetics, though I think this mindset, well, I don't even know if it's a mindset. Of course, every game has its vision for what it wants, but there's been a few games, Apex Legends, Killer Instinct, Overwatch, they approach audio in such a information hierarchy type of design that I really believe that these games are really pushing us forward. And of course, like I said before, text-to-speech is crucial for blind accessibility. Still in the early stages, but just in the last few months, we've made massive progress. And sound design and screen implementation are handled by separate departments. So yes, we're game audio, but then screen readers handled by programmers. So it's getting that dialogue to start and approaching it just from a different way than we usually have. And another hang up is that with mobile, developing for TalkBack isn't the same as developing for voiceover. So it's not like you can just make it for one and done type of thing. Though I think that can be, like I said, when it comes to Unity and Unreal, I really think they hold the keys to that type of progress. So let's get into some of the accessible design. We have a half hour. I don't want to kill anybody's brains by going on too long. So when it comes to accessibility, this was a good definition by Josh Straub. He runs a site called Dagger System, which is about accessible games, accessible gaming. He does reviews. He says it's about giving as many players as possible the best opportunity of completely experiencing a game. So that's as many players and the best opportunity and completely experiencing a game. So there's a lot of different qualities to that quote. So it is, for me and for others, I won't say that, of course, everybody agrees with me on this, but it's about reaching as many players as you can. So if you make a game that is low vision accessible, but it's maybe not it's not completely blind accessible, you still open it up to more players. And so it shouldn't be, I've left out these people and the game should not be released. I think that, like I said, maybe not everybody will agree with me, but I think a lot of people do. And especially as we're figuring out more best practices for all this type of accessibility. And blind accessible audio can help players learn to play and control the game, and the control is the big thing, because you don't want players who just have a passive experience. And it can also help them understand the story and just be more engaged and informed. So you want to ask yourself, can the player understand where they are and where they can go, what they're supposed to do, and how they are intended to feel? And like I said to at least a few people, some of these slides are a little Frankenstein from other talks. So if you've seen anything else, this will be little bits of repeat, but I hope it's through a bit more of a new lens. So some of the associated fields are, this is something that I wish I heard about like 5-10 years ago, interaction sound design. So it sounds obvious, and some people call it sonic interaction design. I feel like interaction sound design is a little more commonly used to define it these days. And it's just about employing sound to convey information, meaning, and aesthetic/emotional qualities in interactive contexts. But it's a field that is kind of taken over by mobile and I would say tech. So when it comes to apps, and it's not commonly used with games as much that I've seen. So you'll see a lot of interaction sound designers, at companies like Facebook, but I don't see as many of those because games are inherently interactive. It's still a very different approach, though. So
Can you clarify what interaction sound design is? Like, I don't have any sense of what that could possibly be.
So, like I said, it's a broad. The definition of using sound to convey information, meaning, and aesthetic, that sounds just like game audio. So the definition of it is very broad. But a lot of people, when it comes to sonic interaction design, it's really more of looking at iconic sounds. So portraying a whole lot of meaning into very small sounds. So like when you have an app like...
kind of like the sound identity, like of the startup of a computer would be an example of that?
Yep. Yeah, like almost like sonic branding, but a little less on the branding side.
Gotcha.
Even though that is also an inherent part of it.
So just a question, would you say Killer Instinct is an example of that?
Of interaction sound design? Like the game Killer Instinct? It has, yes. So because of the amount of information they put into each punch, each kick, you can tell which character it is. Like I said, it's a very broad topic, and I'm just getting more information on it. I don't think it's actually even been completely, well, I guess I don't want to say that because of all the research that put a lot of time into it. It can vary from modeling sound to the way you experience a sound. So it actually covers a lot of from tech to user experience. I wish I could give a better clarity on it, but I brought it up because it's something that everybody needs to look more into with me. So also, we have user experience design, which is a little more straightforward. It's enhancing user satisfaction by improving usability, accessibility, and the pleasure of interacting with the product. So user experience kind of holds, just like how human-computer interaction holds kind of a wide field, user experience, you get a little more focused, but it's all about the person. So it's not technology driven, it focuses more on the human experience. And it's also not anecdotal. So it's not, this is how one person thinks, this is how another, it's about finding those, the research studies to back it up.
Human-centered design, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And it's also not, a lot of people mix it up with usability and user interface design. So it's separate, it holds those, but it's not the same as those. So with usability, that's about a product being used by specific users to achieve specific goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in mind. And with user interface design, like I said, it's very visually oriented, but it values gameplay information over immersion, and that's something that I think we can learn from in sound design. So it's not about, it is about making things pretty, of course, but you still need that information. So if you think of, say, Super Mario Brothers, nobody said, well, there would be a coin floating in the sky with a number, like that's not immersive. You know, like it was like, no, we need to know how many coins we have, so it's got to be on the screen. And so we just don't take quite the same, though this is changing. I guess I am generalizing a lot. But I feel that audio always has the aesthetics as number one. And I think we can maybe relax on that a little bit just to make sure the game is accessible. And by having those also allowing people to turn it on, turn it off if they want. Just like with that accessible sound in Injustice. Like I play with it on because I like to know when I'm next to something that's interactive and I like to know quickly. So I keep it on even though I can see the outline. And then also with user interface design, it's about user control, user memory load, and consistency. So these are three principles that I'm not going to quite go into as much in this talk, but they are they kind of frame how we can think of sound design with people or with the human experience. So here's a video I made this a little while ago, so don't judge this. I was learning Unity and C# and it was more about the interaction. I was trying to get a screen reader to work with Unity. So the sound design is like I'd like to just redo all the sound design. But this game can be played without the screen on because of the panning, because of the shortcuts that you can access for information. I prefer that it had an option for voice, like spoken voice or text-to-speech when it comes to the story elements. And then it also, the way that sound is portrayed through icons, but also icons to confirm the sound, but text to bring up the menus. So I'll go into a little bit more detail, but I'll play it for now. Okay. Oh.
Tower Defense 2D. Press spacebar to begin. Assignment. Press spacebar to select, or press the arrow keys to find a level. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 2, Level 1. Assignment. It is time, young commander, to prove your skills. The beasts of Diablo have planned a series of attacks to avenge their ancestors. And for our mystic neighbors, the Fieldia, it couldn't be a Level 1. Press spacebar to begin battle. Press enter at any time for more options. The beasts are on their way, and you have only 25 gold to start hiring mercenaries. You will earn more gold as you attack the enemies. There are 6 defending towers available. To open the tower menu, press T. Use the arrow keys to toggle through the towers, and press spacebar to select a tower. Then, to choose a Tower 1, Tower 2, Tower 3, Tower 4, Tower 5, Tower 6, Tower 1. Archer 5 gold. Tower 1, Tower 2, Archer 5 gold, Wizard 6, Soldier 4 gold. Tower 1, Tower 6, Tower 5, Tower 4, Archer 5 gold, Ballista 50, Cannon 10 gold. Tower 1, Tower 6, Tower 5, Tower 6, Archer 5 gold, Ballista 50. 14 remaining gold. 11 remaining enemies. Tower 1, Tower 6, Archer 5 gold, Ballista 15 gold. Congratulations, you have won this round. Press spacebar to go to the main menu.
Alright, so there's quite a few things going on, and I think I'll just leave it to my slides to run me through it. So, when it comes to the way that I broke it down, instructional information, positional information, emotional information. I just realized that I think I put my slides, and I could have put my slides in a better order on this. All right. So for the instructional information, actually what I'm going to do is jump forward to where I want to go. And I have a lot more slides, so I'm going to eventually just cut it off at like an hour and some change because I have like a lot of slides. So, when it comes to the core elements for accessible sound, I broke it down into these to go along with the positional, informational, emotional. So you have speed, you have flexibility, you have memory load, you have notifications and reinforcements, and then you have the emotion and storytelling. So when it comes to the speed, you want to be concise and place key terms first. So when it came to the text on that video, I try to keep things short, and I think I could have actually shortened it even more. But it's also keeping crucial information first when it comes to what's being read by the screen reader, because it's just information. It's not trying to get the emotion. It's not trying to portray story. It's just getting things as quickly as possible. And so that's why with the calling up the towers, instead of adding more words to it, it was just as short as possible. So that way, if somebody's coming up, instantly they know what they've chosen, and they can go to the next tower. So first I had, even with Tower 1, Tower 2, I could even say first tower or second tower. So that way, even faster, you know first, second. You don't have to wait for the word tower to go by. And then also allowing the dialogue to be interrupted. So instead of having to listen to it say Tower 1 each time, I can just flip through and it gets interrupted. And all the menu screens could be interrupted at any time. And any sounds that are often interrupted, you may as well just shorten them up or duck them also. So when it comes to, say, the footsteps, there were the tiny little footsteps, but it's keeping them short so they're still clear and it's not just this mud, of course. I mean, that's something we naturally do as sound designers, but it's also looking at every sound of how long it needs to be played and what kind of emotional information that you could get from certain sounds. And when it comes to rarer sounds, ones that are more gratifying, here is one of my favorite sounds from Fallout New Vegas. If it will play. So that sound only happens once in a while, but it actually plays through the entire time each time it plays. So it doesn't need to be interrupted by anything. It'll just go over the story, whatever you're doing at the time. It'll just keep playing because it's rare and it doesn't interrupt from anything else that's going on. So you also want to be flexible. So when it came to the dialogue, the text-to-speech solution that I had was actually audio files of text-to-speech. So that was not the solution I wanted. I originally used this one plugin, but it had a slight delay, like a half-second delay, and it completely killed the gameplay. Completely killed it. It made it frustrating. So I had to go through and just make audio files of the text. So it works. I chose kind of a mid-level screen reader pace. So like for me, that was like, okay, I could easily, comfortably play with that. When I had somebody who was sighted test it out, it was way too fast for them. And for a lot of people who always use screen readers, that would be incredibly slow. So you do want to allow that flexibility, and that's what text-to-speech offers over voice actors. Even though of course, I love voice actors should get all the jobs. But when it comes to using text-to-speech, it's an asset, not a last resort. And also using audio sliders for that flexibility. This kind of goes more along the lines with, it can help for people with visual impairments. It can also help people with anxiety or people with sensory processing disorders. So allowing somebody to remove the sounds that distract them. So say, for instance, even competitive players like Siegel for Overwatch, like he doesn't play with any music on. He plays just with the sound. And then he also plays with the graphics at a very low resolution, making everything much clearer. And so sometimes removing those distractions helps with the gameplay. And it also helps people be able to, if there is a distracting sound, they can reintroduce it later if they want to. So they can actually start to get used to certain sounds. So a good example of a game that has used this would be Pit People. I know I have it in here somewhere. Like I said, this is really long, so I'm not going to go. There it is. There we go. So they actually have 7 different sliders for audio. They have the master, FX, dialogue, narrator, interface sound, cinematic, and music. So instead of the basic 3, I was really surprised to see the interface sounds because you just never know. And I actually had somebody mention about creating music, having 2 different options for music, one that is less busy than another. To be able to help people to concentrate during the game, but also having the bombastic cinematic sound for the people who want that soundtrack in their game. So it's all about finding what is reasonable, because you can easily go down a rabbit hole, and that's why it's important to test with players with disabilities, to avoid those rabbit holes, to be able to get not anecdotal evidence, but tested experience. And there are so many gamers out there now with visual impairments or disabilities of all sorts who have so many years of experience of playing games and offer such great feedback. So I'll be mentioning a few people that you can contact at the end.
Do you have any statistics on how many blind or sight impaired designers there are in the vast
like sound designers?
Just within the industry of game design, just what is the ratio to which like disabled designers are hired or disabled user testers are hired by those gaming companies?
So they've had to have initiatives for this. So currently, Able Gamers has player panels. So they have, I think, 400 testers with disabilities who companies can reach out to and test their game. And there's also the Accessibility User Collective that also does testing they did a testing for Forza Motorsport and a lot of I think it's a joint Microsoft and I forgot the name of the other organization that they're involved with. But it's a joint effort. But when it comes to representation within the industry, it's difficult because, of course, people design for the people around them. And that's been, for me, a crucial element is having more designers, sound designers with disabilities there, because then people don't even think about it. They don't have to, when we think of who games are made from, I mean, that's why we've had these trends for so long, and we're starting to see the changes because of who is being hired into game companies, and we're starting to see those changes. But when it comes to designers with disabilities, we still have a ton of advocating to do. And it does create a lot of new challenges, but it's taking a focused effort. That's why, like for me, with the audio mentoring project, which is a thing that I lead, and don't throw rocks at me because we're way behind on things. Like nobody's heard. It's like I said, I've been gone for so many things, but we actually do have a new volunteers, all that. So it's going in a good direction. Anyway, I'm not going to do any more caveats with that, but that's for that one though. Getting that mentorship for sound designers with disabilities is so important. And it goes beyond, of course, sound designers with disability. It goes to any creative with a disability. And getting that one-on-one mentorship versus requirements.
I will say, I work for an organization called Art Beyond Sight, and we work with
I heard.
Blind artists. And the interesting thing is that what you learn from a blind designer and what you learn from a blind artist is a completely different framework. And it doesn't just serve the interest of the blind community, it actually opens up new creative directions for gaming in general. So there is an opportunity there because those perspectives can inform a new framework and kind of better gaming too for everybody.
Definitely.
And especially the haptic aspect of things. Like it's a totally different set of sensory inputs. It's interesting stuff. Yeah,
and it's a lot of stuff that is maybe subconscious. It's going to be intentional for people who need it, but it's going to be subconsciously better for everybody else. So it's not going to take away from the experience. It's just going to make the games better for people without the disability who rely on, say, haptic feedback, or like for me with the additional sound design that I like in games that are blind accessible.
Will you make this slide deck available?
Yes, I will, and it'll be all the slides. Like I said, I was like, okay, I'll go over this. No, I'm going to go over that. Okay. And also getting along with working memory as an element. So it's limiting what needs to be memorized. You can only demand so much of your player. So if everything has an iconic sound that players need to memorize, they're going to go nuts. That's why with the little demo, some of it's text and some of it's iconic sounds. So when you open a menu to select a tower or to select one of your defenders, it says the name of it, but I don't need it to also say you've selected the arrow or you selected this, or it just needs an iconic sound for each one of those players just to confirm that you've selected the correct one. But it is unique when it comes to that. And there's also using tutorials and pacing. So on one of the other slides, when it comes to a game, say like Hearthstone, like this is a game that everybody wants accessible everywhere. But when you think of playing Hearthstone, you have your card, and there's the drawing of the character on there, and then there's the text saying what that card does. So you don't read the card every single time that you play. Once you played a card so many times, you just look at the character on the card and you play it because you already know what that character does. And so it's using that same type of element for when it comes to iconic sound and tutorials and teaching gameplay by allowing people to access the, say, written information about what to do, being able to access that at any time too, say in a menu screen, but not forcing it on the player each time that they want to, say, with the, there were shortcuts for the demo, E for enemies, G for gold. So you could press those anytime and it would tell you how much gold you have, how many enemies are left. And so the game doesn't have to tell you every 15 minutes, you can do this, you can do this. It's in the menu screen, it's there if they need it. So if they say, I forgot what the shortcut is, they can go to the menu screen, it'll tell them E for enemies, G for gold. But then they're able to access that information whenever they want. And that reduces the amount of workload for your memory. Yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with Hearthstone, like, why has it been so slow, or what are their barriers to getting it done? Because
for accessibility?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a plan in action for it. I mean, especially when it comes to blind accessibility for just about any game. Like, I have my wish list, people have their wish list, but there's I'm trying to think of even the games that are becoming... I do think that with the screen reader accessibility that has come out, or the text-to-speech, especially when it comes to the CVAA regulations, I do think that's going to push along at least further games into that direction. But even a game like, for me, I think of like Her Story. Like that game could be screen reader accessible, you know, but it's not about retroactive accessibility. It's about getting games that are currently being made to be accessible and pushing it along that way. Because it is expensive to do retrofitting for games.
You want to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's the same with any aspect of accessible design.
Yeah.
You want to make those plans as you're going forward with accessibility in mind from the start.
Yeah. And I did see there was somebody who was making, he was using AutoHotkey to actually make Hearthstone keyboard accessibility, because that's the main thing, is it needs keyboard accessibility, then screen reader accessibility. So it's actually quite a few levels. Even the demo that I made, that was mouse. That was all mouse controlled. So I had to add the keyboard accessibility first before I could do anything. And that took forever. But I was learning C# at the time. But, all right. And the main thing with working memory is you want to use what the players already have. So when it comes to using real life sounds, so that way they don't have to say, what was that? They already know it. If a door closes, a door closes. They already know a door closed. You could use genre-specific sounds, something that has been used commonly in other games of the same genre. You could use, well, the standardization, it's more on the same lines as repetition. So it's repeating enough time that people know what that sound means. So even thinking of like Metal Gear Solid, that the exclamation point sound, like everybody knows it because it was played so many times that you instantly know it's happening. You instantly know that they've seen you. And like with the demo, alternating between dialogue and iconic sounds. And then always letting people allow access to the help screen. So that way they don't have to, they're not forced to memorize everything in the first menu screen and then that's it. They should be able to access that help at any time. So like I said, with the G for gold, E for enemies, using familiar sound effects. When it came to the enemies, their deaths were different than when they first came in. Actually, when they first arrive on the scene, it was, I'm not sure if I quite like the decision. I don't know if it quite works, but they came in groups of 3 within the program. So I had a group of 3 of them sound each time. So you could at least know that 3 arrived. And from the growl, when they first came in, you could get a sense of what kind of enemies were there. So instead of doing 1 sound for each, that it would take too long. So especially if you have 12 enemies come on the scene, it's just 4 groups of 3 sounds. So you get a general idea. I don't think it quite, I tweak it more. It doesn't quite work for me, but it still gives that information. And as they go along and reach near the end, there's a battle horn that plays to warn the player that they are getting close to the end, but they still have time to be able to defend. And of course, you have the death sounds of enemies versus the defenders, and the footsteps that go along. I wasn't sure if footsteps would work at first, but duck down low enough, it's enough that you at least know, because if you have one enemy who's not being shot and there's no footsteps, you wouldn't know that the enemy was there. So at least it gave some indication that there's still an enemy on the screen. And then, of course, you get that confirmation by pressing E. It'll tell you 1 enemy left. And like I said, mixing it up with the dialogue, with the gold enemies, type of defender, and the selected towers, those all use text-to-speech. And with this, with the signs and the feedback, like I said, just don't overdo it when it comes to reminding the player of something that they already know. Allow them to select it whenever they want. And have a good hierarchy of what is important to the player. Like I said, allow them to initiate whenever they want. And use clear patterns. So if they're doing something wrong, let them know it. And so if you are playing a game and you leave the battle scene, thinking of like Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, the guy on the radio tells you you're leaving the battle scene. And so there's no question about it. So it's deterring. Or even when you're playing like a racing game. Of course, with a lot of racing games, it's usually the visual aspect of it. I'm not actually sure if there's a sound. But even reducing the music or changing the type of music if they're leaving a battle scene and they actually want to stay in the battle. So using all of that to be able to inform them that they are going either the wrong way or leaving the battle. And when it comes to the story and emotion, this I touch on another slide. I guess I'm doing too much referencing of other slides. But using voice actors for the story content and using screen readers for the dry stuff. So when it comes to menus and tutorials, it's probably best to use screen readers for a lot of that stuff instead of employing a voice actor to read a lot of dry information. It's what I think is interesting is, say you compare 2 games like Tomb Raider and Skyrim. So with Skyrim, there's like hundreds of books. And so to have a voice actor read all those books, it's going to cost a lot of money. So there's somebody actually made a mod of a screen reader that actually sounds very natural reading the books of Skyrim. And so it's actually quite pleasant still. But you also have a game like Tomb Raider where you find the little messages, the little notes, and those are read by voice actors. And it actually fits into the game really well. So it's finding that balance. And one thing that I think I'll have to leave the slides to show this. Oh, let me just play it. So some people can listen to, this one is in English. All right, so here's an example of just how quickly some people can listen to their screen readers at 450 words per minute. So it's not the average person, but it's capable.
The computer is perfectly normal after running Windows 10. It's in the software where might it happen. A user program called a screen reader to access the computer. A screen reader intercepts what's happening on the screen and presents that information by breadthrough a separate red display or synthesized speech. And it's not the kind of synthetic speech you hear in today's smart assistants. A user robotic sounding voice with speech at around 450 words per minute. For comparison, English is commonly spoken at around 100 words per minute. That's one additional work in my setup. Since I need to read both Finnish and English regularly, I'm reading English with a Finnish speech synthesizer. Back in the old days, screen readers weren't smart enough to switch between languages automatically, so this was what I got used to. Give a sample of this paragraph in red and I would read it. And give the same text spoken with an English synthesizer.
So the only thing I got in there was about 150 words per minute, only because it was repeated, I think, like 3 times. But yeah, that's there's, what is his name? He's Finnish. He actually listens. He put it in Finnish and in English, so people could listen to both. So, but he what is his name? Tuka Ohala or Oyala. Anyway, he's a programmer, and that's how quickly he listens to his screen reader.
Wow.
So, like I said, that's a skill. That is not something that...
It also sounds really interesting.
It does.
It's a nice element, like it's an atmospheric element for anyone who can understand it, just the effect of that voice at that speed.
Yeah.
Character even. Like,
it's almost trippy.
It's very trippy.
But also when you think of, say if somebody is playing a game like Hearthstone that has a timer on it, and you think, well, we have to add text-to-speech to this, and it's going to take them forever to listen to what the card has, and this and that, and if you're putting it through the context of how you think of a screen reader, and suddenly you listen to that, and the card, he could read all the text on every card like 5 times and still have time to make a decision. So it's an asset. It's going as quickly as anybody else is playing the game. So it's using those assets. All right, so I did reset my timer. What time is it? Okay. So
Can I ask
we
you
have
a question about physical computing, like the interface to the games? To what degree is there work being done there? I mean, I know within the realm of assistive technology that there are interfaces that, like my friend Emily has these goggles that have kind of edge detection sensors that tie into haptic feedback that goes into her tongue. Her tongue gets a little electric shock when she understands what the edges of things are, so that's how she's able to draw.
That's very cool.
And that's a technology that I can imagine could be applied to a VR context where edge detection is basically like pixel detection for the edges. So there's that.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
but it's interesting to think of different, like even with sip and puff. So if somebody's quadriplegic, they can still play lots of games using the quad stick.
Yeah,
yep.
Puff of air, yeah.
And so connecting assistive technology to games. For me, I'm more of a software person than hardware. So there's a lot, like Able Gamers does a lot of stuff with hardware. Warfighter Engaged, they do a lot of stuff with hardware. So I would say it is a weak point for me when it comes to assistive hardware.
Right.
But there's even the gloves.
Yeah, the gloves, or even like assigning a button to the E key. And so if I hit the E key, you've got a button that does that function.
Yep.
And you could have that.
Or even with the Xbox with the adaptive controller.
Yeah.
You can reassign all the keys however you want. And they use, it's not open source, but it uses buttons that they're not Microsoft made buttons. They're just the buttons that you can find anywhere. So, and they all hook up to the Xbox adaptive controller, which they're calling ZAC now because of XAC. So they call it the ZAC attack. And, but yeah, it's using, in those kind of things, people with no disabilities are not going to be exposed to those things unless they go out and unless they hire people. And it's that type of interaction that's going to, there's even, like when it comes to VR, say that works for her, but you could also use it, like I said, if somebody has motion sickness and they want to play VR, but they can't look all the time. Yeah. And they can still get that feedback when it comes to haptics. So it just opens up kind of this whole new world. And some of it can be down a rabbit hole, like I said. So it's getting those, the people involved, which is my last, I'll go over this, and then we'll have a little quick discussion. But these are the people I want to mention before I run out of time. So we have Brandon Cole, Sightless Combat, Thomas Torek, and Jesse Anderson, or Legally Sighted. These guys are great when it comes to accessibility, low vision or blindness, and gaming. They have years and years of experience. They have so many great ideas. They have systems when it comes to testing games. And so for a quick intro of each person, so Brandon Cole is an accessibility consultant and blogger. He's been writing about blind accessibility and his experience as a blind gamer since 2012. And he has made in-person studio visits, and he's also spoken at several conferences like GDC, GA-Conf, and accessibility boot camps for Microsoft and Sony. Sightless Combat, he is also an accessibility consultant, and he has also spoken at the Game Accessibility Conference and at Microsoft's Gaming and Disability boot camps. He also undertook a fellowship with the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust in 2017, where he attended E3 and reported on the state of blind accessibility in the industry and covered companies like Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, and Valve. He also just started an initiative called Transcribing Games, which adds audio description to Let's Plays. So they have they have God of War, I'm trying to think of what other games, but it's a very new project, and it's excellent. And like I said, he's also visited several studios, and he plays everything. He sees how far he can get in games, and right now he's playing, I know he's been playing Halo 5 and Gears of War. He plays everything and sees how far he can get, and he is, when it comes to gaming, he's a competitive Killer Instinct player, and he just murders everybody. He taught me how to play Killer Instinct, and he didn't teach it to me like, okay, this is what you do. He just kept killing me over and over again until I was able to somewhat defend myself a little bit longer than last time. So,
do you know offhand if Fortnite has any accessibility features?
Fortnite has, they have an accessibility feature for deaf players, which was actually created initially for players using mobile on a subway, so they wouldn't have to use the sound to know the location. So it's this circular, it's this circle that shows where the sound is coming from. When it comes to screen reader accessibility or blind accessibility, I'm not sure. But they are doing, they have some great, I wish I could remember her name. I know her name because I've read all of her stuff, and it's escaping me right now.
Liz Jackson?
No, it was...
Okay. I was a guess.
Yeah, but she's, they have some excellent accessibility people on their team. Even when it comes to color blindness, they've done so much with color blindness too. Yeah. And we also have Thomas Twerk. So in 2013, he started a thread that compiled all the mainstream games that he was able to play, and this thread actually it's kept going, and so these were games that the developers didn't even know that anybody with blindness was playing their games. And at this point, it has over like 1,400 comments, and it's been viewed 880,000 times on the site. And they only have, or not only, but they have 125,000 users on audio games. So it just shows how popular, just how much gamers with visual disabilities want to be able to play mainstream games. Because there are a lot of audio games out there, but I want to play with everybody else too. So, and we also have Jesse Anderson, who has his YouTube channel Illegally Sighted. He has over 1,000 videos about gaming from his perspective as a low vision gamer. He has a playlist dedicated to accessibility in VR. He's also talked about VR accessibility at the ID24 conference, and he spoke at Game Accessibility Conference this year. And yep, so along with them, there are so many more people just in recent years who have started channels while gaming with low vision, blindness, and it just continues to grow, and it's awesome. And there's also more companies. The most recent ones would be with Blind Sparrow Interactive. They have some upcoming games they're dedicated to blind accessible games. And Fear recently came out that was very popular, and Hero's Call, like I said, that one came out a couple years ago. They did a Kickstarter and just great sound design. I don't know if anybody knows Drew Becker here. He's a sound designer. He goes to GDC a lot. But anyway, he worked on the sound. And there's actually a game engine coming out called Sable Game Creator, which is a game engine that is blind accessible. So then people can make their own games. So, and then even larger studios like Turn 10, they have a lot of initiatives for accessibility. And even with they recently hired a presentation audio lead, and accessibility was in the job description. And I know that they are looking to add blind accessibility when it comes to the Forza games. Right now they're working on, they had the research study with the Accessibility User Collective that allowed for with game chat. So they've been working on that, but they are expanding it past that. And so this is just a quote. I'm not going to go into the personas because I only got like 8 minutes left, and I want to have a bit of a more discussion from you all. But this is one thing to keep in mind. So when you hear someone might want this, you know you're about to hear a really bad design decision. So it's the word someone might want this. So it's looking at, there are so many people out there who are willing to offer their feedback, test your game, give you personal insight, that there's no reason to say someone might, because there are so many people out there that you can test with. So that's testing with gamers with disabilities is like, if you remember one thing from this entire talk, like that's the thing I really want to impart on you all. So I think I'm going to end it there because, like I said, I have way too many slides. But I do want to go... Okay, there we go. A couple other projects coming out. Microsoft Guide Dogs, which is an app for... it's a map app to allow people with visual impairments to be able to navigate. So it's like Google Maps. I mean, not Google, you know what I mean. MapQuest, Google Maps, all that kind of stuff. Because it's Microsoft. So it's like Microsoft Maps, I guess. But it uses only sound. And there's also the Audio Pizza podcast. This guy, he's doing some really fascinating things. And like I said, I haven't had time to delve into the things that were just before and after GDC. But he actually teaches, he has visual impairments himself. And he's teaching other people with visual impairments to do sound design with Reaper. And like I said, they have a podcast. And there's also Imitone. That is a plugin. It's so it's voice to MIDI. And he's been making the app blind accessible or screen reader accessible, so that for Windows. So that way, if you want to use the app, you can use it with the screen reader. Which there were some plugins that are screen reader accessibility, but and it's actually a lot more straightforward of a process than you would think anyway. But anyway, and then there's also Accessible Realities, which is it's for VR, and it's allowing objects to be spoken, for objects to be tagged for the screen reader. So Accessible Realities, there's actually another one that I just heard of too that I don't remember the name of it. But that allows for more of the recognition of what is in your scene. And like I said, that confirmation of knowing this is in front of me. And like I said before, the Sable Game Creator. Another game to check out is Eagle Island. They have a lot of accessibility. It's not completely blind accessible, but it's very, very... They've added... you can remove the background to make it clearer. You can add outlines of the characters. I believe it has some screen reader accessibility, and the list kind of goes on for that game, which is awesome. And then there's also the Audio Game Jam every October, which is run by James Kyle. And for the websites of the guys that I mentioned, so we have Illegally Cited, Brandon Cole, Silas Combat, and Thomas Twerks sites. And there's a podcast episode with Joseph Bine of Out of Sight Games, who made A Hero's Call. And that podcast basically says everything much more eloquently than I ever could. Like, he covers so much. So it's a great episode that I think everybody should check out. And as I mentioned before, Ian Hamilton, you all need to, if you want to know anything that's going on in accessibility, like, he is the guy to follow. Not just blind accessibility, but all game accessibility. So, and then you also have some guidelines here with the Able Gamers APX, game accessibility guidelines.
And
audio description.
Where will we get the slide deck?
It'll be on smashclay.com. So actually, that's the last slide that I'll show. This is also going to be a different version of these slides. Will be up on the game accessibility special interest group, the Open Educational Resources page. I can't give you an exact date for when it'll be up there, but I'm trying to work on it. But it's
will you send that out to the NYU listserv or something?
I'm not on that, but I can send it to whoever is. But it will be up on this website, and along with all the stuff that I didn't cover. But a lot of that was also taken from a prior talk, so you can also watch some of the other talks and get a lot of the same information. So,
thank you.
So anyway, I'm going to cut it off there. And what I do want to know is, so for everybody here, so who's heard of game accessibility before? Okay. Who has thought about blind gamers before? Okay, that's more than I expected. Okay. So who is working on accessibility in a project right now? Really? Yeah? So, like, what kind of accessibility is everybody working on right now?
I'm trying to work on a way to teach blind artists to do 3D printing.
Okay.
This is quite a challenge. I'm looking for some creative ideas about how to do this, but the prototyping software that I've come across is not accessible. So I've got to have a way of kind of generating 3D like STL files that can feed into a 3D printing environment.
Wow.
That is outside of that. So I got a lot of work ahead.
Yeah.
Also, I'll be in conversation with the artists themselves to see what they have to say about how they might imagine that kind of relationship.
Yeah, definitely. That's very cool. We had a few others too.
Yeah, there are a couple.
Yep.
There are a couple of options that we've considered tackling our project.
Yeah.
One of the options was to either duck or remove certain ambient sounds, so that way only the active sound effects are played.
Okay.
The other thing that I just implemented last week was setting the position of the announcer voice for either the front speakers or the rear speakers if they have a surround sound system.
Okay. Okay. Very nice.
Yeah, so we had a talk from Able Gamers late last year, and we're kind of early on in the concept / pre-production on the game.
Yeah.
So we're kind of looking at all the ways that we can do better.
Okay.
This whole process.
Very nice. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, that's very cool that they showed up. Yeah, nice. And
I'm trying to work on. I mean, I'm just learning C# now, but trying to work on a prototype for a game that can be blind accessible.
Okay.
That'll be a short thing, but I think it's doable, and even with the limited skills that I know. I also do, Adriane, I wanted to know, do you have any recommendations for screen readers for Unity and sort of best practices there? Like
the plugins?
Yeah, just like the names of plugins and stuff.
So that's the thing that I've been struggling to find a clear answer. So there is the Unity Accessibility plugin, the UAP. It's made by Michelle Martin. I think her last name is Michelle Martin, who is awesome. So I should definitely know her last name because I've talked to her a lot. So that one works with UI elements. I haven't tried it out yet, so I can't say if there is any sort of delay or anything with it.
Right. But for like a narrative game, it should be doable.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. And there's also, I was able to use a plugin called RT Voice Pro, where I was able to export the screen reader, the text-to-speech to audio files and then implement them in Wise. So like I said, it's best to have that range of the range of speech rates. But if that's all you have, at least it's still accessible. But I am hoping with the Communications Video Accessibility Act, with this last waiver, I'm really hoping that's going to push Unity and Unreal, because when it comes to in-game chat, it's got to be accessible. And then all the UI and menus that lead up to turning on that in-game chat have to be accessible too. So I'm hoping that's going to, they're going to get enough developers saying, hey, like, we need this stuff, and why can't it just be built in? And I'm really excited with Lumberyard. I mean, if Poly works in Lumberyard, then, I mean, when I asked them, I was like, is there anything for Lumberyard? Oh yeah, we got Poly. And I'm like, do you realize I've asked at like Unity and Unreal like every year, and they're always like, no. And for them to just be like, yeah, we got this. It's like, if it works, like, that's huge. So, and it would be awesome if Poly could be used also in other game engines. So like I said, I got some more research to do on that, but finding that workflow is, it's going to be gold when there is a good workflow. So, yeah.
I think that future audio technology might play a huge role in making these sort of AAA experiences a lot more accessible. A few years ago, I had worked on a project where the goal was to make the design sort of audio-driven first, and then all the visuals would then complement the audio that you were hearing. And we were making a lot of use of room modeling and occlusion to sort of make as the player would approach a wall, for instance, you would hear the reflections of the footsteps as you would hear them if you were walking in a room, or if you threw something around the corner, you would hear that there was a corner nearby. So the idea of taking this concept and applying it to a game like Skyrim, where if you shoot an arrow around the corner, for example, you hear that there's a corner there, or you hear the reverberation of a cave or a long tunnel. And I think that there's some parallel there with accessibility and just, increasing the fidelity of audio design and the experience in general.
I do think that there is like a little caveat with it, that it still needs to be designed with, so something can be realistic, but it doesn't always mean that it's accessible. So like even when it comes to, say, Overwatch, or even, I think they do this in Overwatch, they actually remove occlusion from the ultimate abilities, so that way it's clearer. So it's not actually realistic, but it's clear because you want that immediate gameplay information. So sometimes going backwards on realism, or even with Apex Legends, when an enemy is pointing at you and shooting, it's louder than if they're pointing away, which is not realistic, because you're gonna hear that shot regardless of where the bullet's going. Unless you hear like a ricochet or something like that. But the actual impact, the actual firing of the weapon is louder if they're pointing at you. So it's going against realism into designing that experience.
Right.
Kind of same thing with VR even. It can feel realistic, but it's also making sure that it's designed with accessibility as the intent.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever implemented like a virtual echo click?
A virtual what?
Echo click.
Echo click? Oh, as far as like White Cane?
Well, or the kind of echolocation stuff people do verbally.
As far as just like when it comes to a game's reverberation.
Yeah, like a lot of blind people, well, not a lot, but some use echolocation, and if you could have a button press that was like essentially click.
Oh, to get the reverberation.
To hear the then I don't know if that would work. But.
Siori actually worked on that concept a few years ago.
Monopolize the conversation here, but
no, do.
But speaking to retroactively, working on a game that doesn't have accessibility built into it. I don't know how many people are familiar with the game Gone Home.
Yep.
But I worked on that for an accessibility project back in 2015, just because I wanted to just get to the crux of accessibility, not worry about art, come up with a storyline and an audience for it, because I have no art skills. So I worked closely with a, I don't call him a blind gamer, Gus Chalkas. Who is really, really heavily involved in accessibility as someone who's blind himself, or at least extremely visually impaired. So he actually came up with that idea of, hey, I use a white cane on a day-to-day basis. Why not give it a shot? And just for the sake of experimentation, I threw it in there. So I don't want to share it because I always just feel like I could have done a lot better on that project. But yeah, I was basically just heavy panning and very directional localization in the game environment. I just sort of included that in there too.
How did it work?
I think my test subjects that I used were just being a lot nicer than they should have been. And they were like, "Oh yeah, this is great." Like I can tell, I'm facing left or right or something like that. I personally thought, as a sighted, player, that I could have done better, and I could have used an audio middleware software like Wise or Fmod to make it a lot less jarring. But yeah, I think it's a really great idea. I think I would love to either work on an entirely new project or see someone implement that, and I could learn from it. Yeah.
Did you use binaural recording for the contextual part of it, or how did you use the spatial elements?
I relied heavily on Unity game engines, built-in audio engine at the time. So that in itself has a lot of baked-in 3D, programming, especially stuff that's goes way over my head, especially back in 2015. So I just for the sake of experimentation, I just relied heavily on that. Yeah. But if I were to redo it, I would definitely customize it a lot more than I did.
And you would just have to use headphones in order to do that.
Yeah. That was one thing. So everyone I tested the little prototype out with used headphones.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. I'm not very good at leading group discussions, but or transitioning, I should say. But yeah, that's the thing though, is looking at it from a lot of different aspects, a lot of different angles, looking at influences in people with disabilities with their lives, and looking at strengths instead of looking at their strengths instead of seeing everything as a weakness. So with Siori, it's that the cane was a strength, not a weakness, and it was an asset to the game. And so it's looking at games from that perspective. And like I said, when it comes to the mental mapping, everybody should try A Hero's Call. It's hard. It's really hard though. But it's amazing just how people can jump right into that game and know exactly where to go, and exactly, especially when it comes to shortcuts, memorizing shortcuts, and just the amount of menu screens that people have to memorize currently to even get into a game. It's crazy, or it's awesome. But I think we can do a whole lot more with the tools that we have available to reduce that mental load on gamers with disabilities or who are blind.
I just wanted to mention that the organization Adriane site, which is not too far up the street here, they have a library of research that dates back to 1973. They've got these file cabinets filled with all of this work that they did with blind people to have better access to art within the context of museums and so on and so forth. And some of that data may be useful in game development. It might be it's fascinating stuff to look at. So if anyone wants to make an appointment over at RP on site, I'm sure that they'll be more than willing to have you take a look at the materials they've got accrued there. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't go to waste. It's been in these cabinets just kind of unused for a while now. So.
Yeah. I used to, what was her name?
Elizabeth Axel. She's the founder.
No, it was
Christine Donlan.
No, she was a therapist, I think.
That I wouldn't know the names of the therapy people because it's a different kind of organization now.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, but that organization is very. It's just interesting, like just the ways that you can interpret art and experience art, and like with games, I think it's getting away from. Games are already interactive, so the player's already going to have a different experience than you as the designer, and so that's something we all kind of have to let go when we make games. But it's also letting gamers play however they want to play a game. So there's even some people who make games out of games from what they're able to access within that game, and they've made up a whole different game from what they're actually able to get through. So it's allowing those kind of experiences. And but it's mostly for me. It's about the dialogue and discourse to make sure that goes on and that people have those resources, knowing about gamers who are willing to give feedback and test, and that to me is the way forward. So I don't know how to end my talk, so I think what I'm going to do is just grab my computer and walk away. Thank you. Awesome.
That was a great presentation.